This is the document they never intended for you to hear. This is the transcript that was buried under the highest classification levels of the German BND and the French DGSSE. This is the precise moment when the two most powerful leaders in Europe realized that the leader of the free world was no longer leading, he was drowning. We are watching the dissolution of the post-World War II order live and in high definition. Breaking news is flooding in from Brussels, London, Tokyo, and Berlin, confirming the nightmare scenario that diplomatic channels have been trying to suppress for 72 hours. The international community has moved past concern. They have moved past alarm. They are now actively preparing for the total governmental collapse of the United States of America. Mark the date, Wednesday, January 21st, 2026. Time, 9:23 a.m. Central European Time. At NATO headquarters in Brussels, Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg convened an emergency closed-door session of the North Atlantic Council. The agenda was not listed on the public schedule. The topic was not Russian aggression in the Donbass. It was not Chinese expansion in the South China Sea. It was not Iranian proliferation. The sole agenda item was continuity of operations in the absence of American command. Let the gravity of that sink in. America's most critical military partners, the nations we saved in the 1940s, the nations we protected during the Cold War, sat in a soundproof room and discussed contingency plans for a world where the United States is a failed state. We are talking about the German foreign minister openly questioning on the record whether the President of the United States possesses the mental capacity to fulfill his treaty obligations. We are talking about British MI6 receiving orders from Downing Street to assess the risk of American political violence spilling across the Atlantic Ocean. We are talking about the Japanese government quietly, secretly, opening back-channel talks with Beijing to establish emergency communication lines in case the American nuclear umbrella vanishes overnight. This is not normal diplomatic chatter. This is not alliance management. This is a coordinated, terrified international response to what foreign ministries are now calling the Trump constitutional crisis. For 75 years, the American presidency has been the keel of the global ship. Even when allies hated our policies, even when they burned effigies in the streets, they never questioned the stability of the chair. They never worried that the White House would descend into a level of chaos that would make the government non-functional, until now. The global reaction to Trump's legal, financial, and institutional meltdown is not sympathy. It is a mix of sheer panic and ruthless opportunism. Adversaries see a wounded animal, allies see a sinking ship, and neutral nations see a superpower in terminal decline, and they are rushing to the lifeboats. Let's start with NATO, because this is where the knife cuts deepest. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization relies on one fragile concept, Article 5. An attack on one is an attack on all. It is a blood oath, but that oath is worthless without trust. And right now, according to leaked minutes obtained by Der Spiegel and corroborated by intelligence sources across 3 capitals, the trust is gone. The emergency session in Brussels focused on 3 nightmare scenarios that are keeping European defense ministers awake at night. Scenario 1, the transactional ransom. This sounds insane, but intelligence sources confirm it was the primary topic of debate. Trump has reportedly floated the idea in private conversations intercepted by Allied intelligence that he could threaten a unilateral withdrawal from NATO unless European nations intervene in his domestic legal crisis. Sources inside the White House have leaked to the Financial Times that Trump suggested to advisors, if Europe wants our protection, they need to call the banks. They need to help me with the judgment. The logic is twisted, but it is classic Trump. He views the nuclear codes as leverage for a personal loan. He views the Atlantic Alliance not as a sacred duty, but as a protection racket, and European leaders are terrified that he is desperate enough to pull the trigger. Scenario 2. The paralysis. Imagine this. Russian special forces cross the border into Estonia, a clear Article 5 violation. The red phone rings in the White House, but the man on the other end is not the commander-in-chief. He is a man consumed by the seizure of his towers, the mutiny of his Secret Service, and the rebellion of his own cabinet. Is he mentally present? Is he capable of authorizing a counterstrike? Or is he so paralyzed by his own survival that he lets a Baltic state fall? The consensus in the room in Brussels was chilling. We cannot be sure. And if the Russians know we aren't sure, the deterrent is dead. Scenario 3. The betrayal. This is the scenario that caused the shouting match in the secure briefing room. What if Trump tries to use American military forces stationed in Europe to help him in his domestic battle? What if he orders the 40,000 U.S. troops in Germany to stand down from NATO duties? What if he tries to redirect intelligence assets, satellites, NSA listening posts to spy on his political enemies or protect his overseas assets? European officials have watched him try to weaponize the DOJ. They have watched him try to turn the Secret Service into a private militia. They are now forced to ask, will he try to weaponize the U.S. military? The outcome of this meeting was historical. For the first time in history, NATO agreed to establish a crisis communication protocol, a system that allows European armies to coordinate a defense of the continent without American approval. They are building a firewall around the United States to protect the alliance from the chaos in Washington. France and Germany are reportedly accelerating talks on a joint rapid reaction force that can fight without U.S. logistics. They are preparing for a future where the American cavalry isn't coming. They are establishing a working group to study the legal implications of invoking Article 5 if the American president is deemed compromised. Think about that. They are writing the legal framework to bypass the President of the United States in the event of World War II. This is the collapse of the American century. It isn't happening with a bang. It's happening with a meeting agenda in Brussels that excludes the United States. If the NATO meeting was about survival, the conversation that happened 3 hours later was about excision. At 100-page seat, a secure video conference was initiated between the Chancellery in Berlin, the Elysee Palace in Paris, Downing Street in London, and the Prime Minister's office in Ottawa. Notably absent, the White House. We have obtained the readout of this call, and it confirms the death of the G7 as we know it. The topic was the upcoming G7 summit scheduled for June 2026 in Italy. For 50 years, this summit has been the photo op of the free world, the 7 most powerful democracies standing shoulder to shoulder. But Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, who took office late last year, dropped a diplomatic bomb on the group. According to sources, Carney told his European counterparts, "We cannot invite him. If Donald Trump comes to Italy in June, we legitimize a man who may not even be in control of his own government." The silence on the line was deafening. Carney wasn't just suggesting a snub. He was suggesting the suspension of the United States from the table of civilized nations. The British Prime Minister Keir Starmer reportedly pushed back, citing the special relationship, but Emmanuel Macron cut him off. The French president argued that Europe needs to prepare for a post-American world immediately. He cited the intelligence from Washington, the Secret Service mutiny, the seizure of assets, and stated bluntly, "The American seat is empty. The man occupying it is a ghost. This is the reality." The G7 is actively planning to become the G6. They are preparing to coordinate global economic policy without the United States because they view the U.S. Treasury as compromised and the U.S. president as a liability. While the politicians argued, the markets voted, and the vote was a massacre. Wall Street traders are calling it the Trump risk premium. At 9:45 a.m. New York time, as rumors of the NATO meeting leaked, the US dollar index didn't just slide, it crashed. The euro spiked 8% against the dollar, a move usually seen over a decade, not a week. The 10-year Treasury yield hit 5.2%, the highest since 2007. Why does this matter to you? Because when Treasury yields spike, mortgage rates explode, credit card rates explode, the cost of borrowing for the U.S. government explodes. Global investors, the pension funds in Tokyo, the sovereign wealth funds in Riyadh are dumping U.S. debt. They are terrified that a president facing personal bankruptcy and political collapse might try to inflate the currency or default on the debt to save himself. We are seeing capital flight on an unprecedented scale. Fortune 500 companies are quietly moving liquid assets into Swiss francs and gold. They are hedging against the collapse of the American financial system. The world's reserve currency is bleeding out because the world no longer trusts the full faith and credit of the United States. But the most terrifying development isn't in Brussels or New York. It is in Tokyo. Japan has been the cornerstone of American power in the Pacific since 1945. They rely on the nuclear umbrella, the promise that if China or North Korea attacks, America will strike back. But on Monday, January 19th, Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba convened a secret meeting of the National Security Council. The minutes of this meeting, leaked to the Nikkei, reveal a seismic shift. The council discussed the unimaginable, the Japanese nuclear program. The logic is ruthless. If Donald Trump is paralyzed by domestic chaos, can Japan trust him to trade Los Angeles for Tokyo? The answer in the room was a unanimous no. Japanese defense officials are now quietly approaching Beijing to establish crisis communication channels, effectively a hedge against American abandonment. They are signaling to China, "We know the Americans are gone. Let's talk." If Japan goes nuclear or if Japan pivots to China, the American empire in the Pacific is over. We are watching the undoing of 75 years of security architecture in a single week. While our allies are panicking in secure conference rooms, our enemies are popping champagne. The reaction in Moscow, Beijing, and Tehran isn't fear. It isn't confusion. It is pure, unadulterated opportunity. They smell blood in the water, and they are moving in for the kill. Let's start with the Kremlin. Russian state media has shifted its programming to 24-hour coverage of the American collapse. The tone is gleeful. They are broadcasting images of the Secret Service resignation and the Trump Tower seizure on a loop. But the propaganda is just the smoke. The fire is on the border. Since Tuesday morning, NATO radar has tracked a massive spike in Russian military activity. Russian bombers have violated Estonian airspace 3 times in the last 48 hours. They are testing the fences. They are checking response times. They want to know who picks up the phone in Washington when the red light flashes. Putin is gambling that a distracted, bankrupt American president will not risk a nuclear war to save Tallinn or Riga. Intelligence agencies in Poland are reporting unusual troop concentrations. Not an invasion force yet, but a readiness force. They are positioning assets to take a bite out of Europe the moment the American government flatlines. In Beijing, the strategy is quieter, but far more dangerous. The Chinese Communist Party isn't making noise. They are making deals. While the U.S. State Department is paralyzed by the chaos at home, Chinese diplomats are currently sweeping through Southeast Asia and Latin America with a simple pitch. America is chaos. China is order. They are closing trade deals that have been stalled for years. They are offering security guarantees to nations that used to rely on us. But the real heat is in the Taiwan Strait. Since the news of the Secret Service mutiny broke, the People's Liberation Army has increased naval sorties around Taiwan by 40%. They are compressing the gray zone. They are normalizing a blockade. Pentagon analysts are screaming that this is the window. If Xi Jinping believes that the American commander-in-chief is too consumed by his legal survival to order a carrier strike group to the Pacific, he might decide that now is the time to solve the Taiwan question once and for all. And then there is Thrawn. Iran doesn't do subtle, they do kinetic. In the last 24 hours, Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria have launched 7 separate drone attacks on U.S. bases. This is a dramatic escalation. Why now? Because they are reading the tea leaves. They know the Trump administration is fractured. They know the Pentagon is hesitant to ask for authorization from a president who is at war with his own generals. They are pushing the line to see if it holds. If the U.S. does not retaliate, and so far we haven't, deterrence is dead. Finally, look at the United Nations in New York. The Security Council is facing an existential crisis. The U.S. holds a permanent veto, but diplomats from the other P5 nations are currently having a conversation that violates every protocol in the book. They are discussing the legitimacy of the veto. The question on the table, if the U.S. ambassador casts a veto on orders from a compromised president, should the world respect it? There is no mechanism to ignore a veto. But if the world decides to simply bypass the United States, the UN Charter is effectively suspended. We are drifting toward a world where international law is decided by whoever has the most stable government. And right now, that isn't us. The wolves aren't just at the door. They are inside the house dismantling the furniture while the owner fights with his bodyguards. The final verdict is being written by history right now, and it is brutal. We are witnessing the end of the Pax Americana. It didn't end with a nuclear war. It didn't end with an alien invasion. It ended because the American political system cannibalized itself. The world is watching an American president lose his business empire, lose control of his own government, lose the trust of his protective detail, and lose his grip on reality. And the world is asking a question that would have been unthinkable a year ago. What if America is no longer capable of leading? What if the system is so broken that it cannot be fixed quickly? What if this is not just a Trump problem, but a deeper institutional rot that will outlast any one president? Those questions are driving strategic decisions in capitals around the world. Allies are building backup plans. Adversaries are testing boundaries. Markets are pricing in risk. The international order is being rewritten in real time, and the United States is losing its position at the center. Trump's domestic crisis has become a global crisis. His personal legal troubles have become geopolitical. Opportunities for adversaries and strategic dilemmas for allies. The damage he is doing extends far beyond American borders. He is not just destroying his own presidency, he is undermining American credibility and influence for a generation. The world leaders who are reacting to Trump's fiasco are not just commenting on current events, they are making decisions about the future. They are deciding whether to continue betting on American power or whether to hedge their bets elsewhere. They are deciding whether the transatlantic alliance still works or whether Europe needs to go its own way. They are deciding whether the Pacific is still an American sphere of influence or whether it is becoming a Chinese sphere. These decisions have consequences that will last decades. The international fallout from Trump's crisis is just beginning, but the trajectory is clear. American influence is declining. American credibility is damaged. The world order that America built is fracturing, and it is happening faster than anyone predicted. Subscribe to stay ahead of this story. Hit the bell icon to know the moment the next development breaks. Share this with everyone who needs to understand that this is not just an American story anymore. This is a global story. The crisis that started in a Manhattan courtroom is now reshaping the balance of global power. The world is watching America's implosion, and they are preparing for a world where America is no longer the indispensable nation.